Hi, I'm Cressel Anderson, this is Makercise. In this episode, we'll be working on the tailstock base and getting it mounted on the lathe.
The first step is to cut off the sprue, and then you got to clean it up. I started out with a file before I realized that I should use my sander. That really makes quick work. I tried out a technique that many have recommended, and that's to use sandpaper instead of the file. It works pretty good, but then I realized the pattern I cast was smaller than it needed to be by about 3/16 of an inch. I started out with the file, but then I decided, hey, I'll use my table saw sled. I use a separate blade for woodworking and cutting aluminum. The table saw sled makes really nice, clean, and square cuts. You should check out my video on the table saw sled I built. There's a link in the description below. Once the slot was big enough for the bed and the gib, I got started scraping the part. The sandpaper is really nice because it allows you to reduce the wide area of a part down pretty quickly. The scraper is really nice because versus the sandpaper, it allows you to selectively remove off materials where you want. I confirmed the spotting was acceptable to proceed. Then I peeled off the sandpaper from the cold rolled steel. I used that piece as a guide for filing down the clamp pads. I also had to file down the key stock that I use for the gib. I use a small straight edge to check the clearance between the clamp pads and the bedways. I put a piece of 150 grit sandpaper on top of my surface plate. I use that to sand down the part. Now it may just be because I don't have the paper completely flat on the block, but I do notice that when I'm sanding parts, I get a little bit of rounding over on the edges. And it becomes really clear with the top of this where the corners are quite a bit lower than the center. Eventually, I get it to pretty flat all the way across, but I tried to keep light pressure when I was sanding, and then when I picked it up, you can see that it really rounds over those corners. So I scrape in the middle, and the scraper, like I said, really gives you the ability to dial in where you're removing material, and you pretty much chase that front out to the side by scraping off material only in the location that you want. Over several iterations, I got it up to this point.
If you enjoy this project, you should follow me in real time on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, because I post pictures way before I get around to editing the video.
I finished scraping down the clamp pads, and then I cut some pieces of steel to form the clamps. Scored a line using a square, but I used an angle grinder to make quick work of it. Cleaned it up with a file. I used a set of calipers to scribe a line 1/4 inch back from the outside edges of the steel. Once I had the starter holes drilled, I marked where the clamp bolt needs to go, and that way I wouldn't lose track. For all these parts, I end up using a center drill, a number 7 drill, and then I open up the clamp with a 1/4 inch bit, and then I countersink the clamps. And that allows the fastener to go in. However, this one I did on the wrong side. So it took me about 10 minutes, but I decided it was easier just to go back and remake that part. To avoid wasting more time, I decided I would try and mark the clamps as to which side the countersink goes on. I tapped the holes in the tailstock base. Then I installed a single fastener into the clamp. Having one fastener already in the clamp allows me to match drill the other fastener and assure good alignment between the sets of fasteners and the part. After I had the clamp fastened onto the tailstock base, I tried out just a quick test fit onto the bed to make sure it seemed like it was going well. I finished up the front clamp in a similar manner, and then I marked where I wanted the lock bolt to go. Once I had that marked, I drilled it with a center drill, enlarged it to number 7. Then I enlarged that to a 1/4 inch hole. Then I enlarged that to a 5/16 inch hole, which is appropriate for the tap that I'll be using. And then I proceeded to tap the hole. Before realizing I didn't need to tap the top part, I needed to tap the clamp. So I tapped the clamp, and it got too tough to turn in the chuck. So I had to use the hand tap, and I used the chuck to help me stabilize that tap, make sure it was vertical. Then I enlarged the hole that I had previously tapped, installed the bolt, and verified that it actually did its job. I cut it off with an angle grinder and then filed it down. After the clamp was done, I turned my attention to the gib. And the gib is adjusted using screws that come in from the outside. So I fixture the piece onto the side of the drill press table, and then I drill 2 holes. Then I tap those holes with a 1024 tap. And again, I use a little mandrel held in the drill press to help me keep the tap vertical. Then I install the gib adjustment screws, which have a little taper on the end. After I slide the gib in, I just tighten those screws up, and they leave little divots in the gib. After finishing the gib up, I made the shims for the clamps. Dialing in the thickness of the shims makes the tailstock base slide really smoothly on the lathe. Next, I turned my attention to the setoverways. This is a 2-inch by 1/4 inch piece of cold rolled steel that allows the tailstock to move to the front and back of the tailstock base and give you the ability to make tapered cuts on the lathe. After I had the setoverways cut to length, I center drilled some starter holes, then I match drilled those into the base so I could tap the hole in the base. I enlarged the hole and countersunk it. I installed a single fastener, attached angle aluminum to the bedways, and then made sure that the setoverways were parallel to that piece of angle aluminum. This approach gives you the ability to ensure that the setoverways are traveling perpendicular to the bedways. I marked and filed a little mark on both the setoverways and the tailstock base, and that allowed me to keep track of the orientation of the setoverways. The last step was to install the clamp stud. After I drilled the hole, I had to tap it, but the F-clamps got in the way, so I ended up finishing up the tapping by hand. The clamp stud allows you to lock down the tailstock anywhere along the setoverways.
If you like this video, check out the full lathe project playlist. I hope this video inspires you to exercise your inner maker.